My name is Dr. Chris Hawn, and I am a professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a proud Wolfpack alum. I'm going to talk about my work in wicked problems and trying to solve them through community science. And I call this work, We Keep Us Safe, Building a Web of Action in Social and Environmental Justice. And this work started from the very beginning, my love of outdoors. My dad and family, we would go on hikes out in the Southwest where I grew up. And I had this real love of nature, and that was fostered by my parents taking me to biology camp when I was 10 years old. I was that kind of nerd. And I really just loved it so much. I could not get enough of just being outside in the adventure of open spaces. And so that really propelled me to want to be a biologist when I grew up. And although I didn't really know how to do that, I was able to go off into college and get accepted into graduate school and go to NC State for my Ph.D. To become a biologist. I got to study ecology and work on these big questions in conservation and really understand how a conservation strategy can be effective in the real world. And I got to work in a big experimental landscape where we manipulated land in order to mimic what we might see in a conservation scenario and test if that was effective. So I studied wildlife corridors and measured the movement of species between habitats that were connected and habitats that were unconnected that we might see in a fragmented landscape. And through that work, I was studying spiders. They were super important for this particular ecosystem because they were predators, tiny little predators that ate things that we knew more about their movement. We knew a lot about butterflies in the system, thanks to the work of Dr. Nick Haddad, my advisor. And so I got to learn a little bit more about this ecosystem by looking at something that was closely linked to those butterflies, one of their predators, a spider. And through my dissertation, I really understood more about how these big changes in the landscape can have effect on something tiny as a spider. And so I actually saw that spiders that I collected in a corridor connected patch were bigger and had more lipid content or fat content because they were eating more things. So I was able to see that the entire ecosystem could be improved by changes in conservation. And so that really informed my work in ecology to understand that if I just look at the right angle, then I could really find this and see this bigger picture to tell me something more about the world, even though I was just looking at, little spiders. And throughout my time at NC State, I've found that work really fulfilling. But there was something that happened that really shifted that. And that was when Trayvon Martin was killed. So that was a young Black child walking out and was killed and perceived as a threat. And in that time, my community was hurting, I was hurting, and I was wondering what I was doing out in the woods studying spiders. It felt like that work that I had invested years in wasn't worthwhile and wasn't the most important thing that I could be doing right now. And what kept me in graduate school was that I was able to do things outside of grad school. I was able to connect with activist communities, particularly those in Durham, North Carolina, that had this very long history of activism. The whole triangle is such a hub for the civil rights and has been for decades. And so I got to learn from those direct action movements and learn more about grassroots organizing and direct action. And through that work, we found that some of that was risky. We found that that kind of direct action can be difficult to get into, and that there were various risks involved, like being arrested or confrontation from bystanders. But those were things that we had to decide in that moment whether we could do, and also if we trusted the people around us to help us when things got rough. And so from that work, I really found this mantra. It's a chant that people will have in protests that's called "We Keep Us Safe," and this is what that sounds like in an action.
Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe.
We keep us safe really is a call to action from anyone in a community that the only skill that you need is to really care and to show up for somebody else. That we can actually teach each other as we are to keep each other safe. And part of that is just care for ourselves and care for each other. And so after I left the Triangle, I really wanted to blend these aspects of my life that were really important to me. It was really important that I did some kind of social action within my work. And it was also important that I used the skills that I had invested so much time in learning, and that's spider ecology. When I went off to UMBC to become a postdoc and then assistant professor, that really gave me the chance to develop my own research platform where I was able to blend environmental justice and social justice with the tools that I had: ecology, conservation, and public science, or getting the public involved in participating in the science that we do. And so from that point on, I was really trying to figure out how we do justice-oriented public science to solve wicked problems. And one of the problems that I saw was air quality. Now, the EPA is charged with the Clean Air Act and improving air quality, and we have made great strides since its creation. And we do have, in a lot of places, clean air and much cleaner air than before that act was put into place. But we also see inequalities in the distribution of air pollution, and that a lot of the burden of air pollution currently is still on low-income folks and BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous people of color. And part of the reason why we still have those issues is a flaw in the design of how we measure air quality and where. The EPA does have very high quality sensors. They are state of the art, and they are also very big and expensive and can only be in a few places. And what we have learned about air quality is that things can change neighborhood to neighborhood, coming close to the source of that pollutant. What we also know about the distribution of those sources of pollution is that they tend to be in low-income neighborhoods, or in places, essentially folks that have less power to say no to that introduction of a contaminant. And so when we actually measure air quality on a really fine scale, like this group out in New York, they were able to put out 100 different low quality air sensors and throughout the city of New York, and could see that change, that shift in air quality, and see that the distribution of those pollutants is not even across the city. And so this is really an opportunity to try to figure out how can we address air quality and really live up to the potential of the Clean Air Act and have that distribution of clean air everywhere across the United States, and do that by doing grassroots monitoring. So I developed a public science project using the skills that I know: conservation, ecology, and public science. So in this project, people monitor their air quality by collecting dust that settles onto spider webs and sending it into our lab to measure the amounts of metal content, a common pollutant that we have in our air. And I wanted to have everybody participate in this project. But in order to have everybody participate in the project, I really needed to center the people that would have the most benefit from the knowledge of the project and the hardest time participating. So I actually started with homeless activists out in Portland and in Baltimore, where I live now. So these are folks that definitely have a lot to gain from clean air, because if you've ever gotten a clean air alert on your phone, the advice is to go inside. So these are folks that generally do not have a safe place to go inside at a given time, so are always going to be exposed to any sort of air pollutant that we have. It was also important for me to start with this community because if I could design a project that houseless activists could participate in, that means that I could remove the barriers that may prevent their participation in the future. And if they could do this, if I could make it low cost so that they can participate, if I could make it accessible for this community, then I know that a lot of other communities could also do this project, regardless of whether they had the means to do so or not. So I want to make sure that I had a really accessible project that can be done by a lot of different folks. And by collaborating with these activists, I could make sure that that could be done. And so I started collaborating with a group called Right to Survive, a activist community made up of current and former houseless people that advocate for their right to live on the street and also improve their living conditions. And together, our collaboration, we called it Resting Safe. And our goal was to have people improve the conditions, environmental, social, so that people could have the right to rest wherever they were. And so this was very much in that mode of we keep us safe. We can make sure that the environment of anyone, anywhere, can be safe so that people are not burdened with contamination by just being outside. So part of what we did for this project was design how people could participate and monitor their air quality. And so by finding webs of funnel weaver spiders, people can go and collect those webs and send them into our lab to measure for a type of contaminant. And we are focused on metals because those are things that can happen with the exposure of these communities and many others around the country. That kind of metal contamination goes into the air from car exhaust or coal power plants. Lots of things can emit that kind of metal contaminant. And while I did create the project, this technique of biomonitoring was not unique for this project. There have been lots of biomonitors or living species in order to detect some sort of pollutant. And in the past, people have used moss, algae, and in this case, spider webs in order to collect a contaminant. And so I was able to look at past research done and see that biomonitors, in particular spider webs, can be used to detect some of the same things that the EPA monitors. And biomonitors are used extensively in some places. In fact, in the UK, they monitor their metal contaminants by using moss. Mosses grow extensively throughout the United Kingdom and throughout the EU. And they are able to collect moss in different countries around the European Union and send them into labs to measure their metal content and use that to understand this large-scale patterns of air quality. I would like to do something similar. However, moss does not grow everywhere within the US. These spider webs do. These funnel weaver webs are found in all 50 states. And not just in all 50 states, but they're in all different kinds of environments. They're found in the desert. They're found along houses. They're found along roadsides. They build their webs in the forest. So they really are a diverse group of spiders that are very consistent with their web building behavior that makes them ideal to collect and monitor this type of air contamination. The collection part is really simple. People just have to use a stick or a collection rod to essentially make cotton candy out of the spider web. So just twirl it and then send that into our lab for detection of metals. The materials for the project are also, again, low cost. And that's in contrast to a lot of those sensors that have been used to monitor air quality, which the low cost sensors can still be, the cheapest ones are $200. And so low cost for this project means $5 at most. But a lot of times I've made it so that we can use materials that you may have easily accessible to people, like a straw as a collection rod or a pin. Once people collect that web, they send it in, and we can see the metal content within that region. And so this is data from spider webs collected in Baltimore. And in this study, we looked at 7 different metals, and we were able to detect all of these metals along these 3 neighborhoods within the city. And so by adding to our collection, we can really see not just the detection of metals, but the change in metals neighborhood to neighborhood. We can do what the EPA is right now struggling to with a top-down approach. We can use lots of individuals to collect the spider webs that are already all around us and understand that fine scale pattern of air quality and air pollution. This project that we call Spidey Senser is really just getting started, but we're seeing interest from activist communities, school groups, Girl Scouts, and everyone in between. It's something that everyone can do to do a little bit more taking care of our own health and the health of our neighbors. We can keep us safe. Through this project and others, I think we can find more patterns of air quality that we're missing with much more expensive measures. And it could give us a pinpoint and really start conversations about people that may have been left out of conversations about clean air and health. And so when you think about embarking on how to get involved with these wicked problems, for one, don't stress out. When I was a student at NC State, I had no idea that I could blend all of these pieces of my life together to do a project like this. But every step of the way, I was collecting something that was essential to this on the other end. So Chris from 10 years ago would be so stoked that this is happening, but I never would have predicted that this is the way. It all came together. And so just think about, as you're going on and starting your life as a student at NC State, of just following each step of the way, those passions that you find, and those little breadcrumbs to really think about how you can care for yourself, the environment, and maybe you can put those pieces together to make some sort of impact on these really complex and complicated problems. Sometimes the answer is really simple and right in front of you.